Welcome everybody. My name's Megan Paul and I'm one of the co-chairs of the National Volunteering Research Network. We're still letting people in, so I think that's going to continue for a little while. What I would like to do, however, is just talk a little bit about what we're doing today. Welcome everybody. And I would like to welcome all of those people who are part of the National Volunteering Research Network to this event, and also those who are joining us for the first time. We have a special guest today, but before we start, I would like to acknowledge that many of us will be on the traditional lands of our Indigenous peoples across Australia. I'm actually on Wajat Noongar Budja in Western Australia, and acknowledge that Indigenous knowledges have actually been passed down for many, many generations, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. We have a place in the chat where people can start a discussion or ask a question, and we have somebody monitoring the chat. But in the meantime, I would just like to give you a little bit of background about IAVE, or the International Association for Volunteer Effort, and then our guest, Wendy Osborne. So the International Association for Volunteer Effort actually grew out of a gathering in 1968, where a small group of leaders of volunteers from around the world had been sharing ideas and experiences and found it so valuable that they wanted to make the experience available to others. And this small group had a very specific focus, but they wanted to, that benefit of sharing experiences as leaders of volunteers was something that they wanted to provide the benefit of to others. So the first IAVE World Volunteer Conference was actually in 1970. IAVE has on their website like an expression or a phrase or a mission, which is about building volunteer leadership to change the world, which I think is something that most of us in the volunteering space would embrace. IAVE believes that volunteer leaders, that is individuals and organisations, are critical to valuing, supporting and developing volunteering at national and regional levels. So there are members of IAVE in over 100 countries. It's the largest global network of volunteer leaders and includes volunteers, government agencies, multinational agencies and institutions. It includes people like myself who are academics. It includes non-government organisations and non-profit organisations and businesses. And among those members is Volunteering Australia, who has had a long involvement. In the period since the 1970 conference, there have actually been 27 international conferences, and my own connection to IAVE has been a little bit through those conferences, but also through other conversations. So I remember hearing about the Sydney conference in 1996 from my mum. I remember presenting in Singapore in 2010 and at the Gold Coast in 2014. 2014, Volunteering Australia actually was part of hosting it. And also remember hearing from the Australian delegates who went to Mexico in 2016, which opened up a whole range of different and new discussions. I also remember nearly going to South Korea in 2002, but there were travel restrictions on many of us through our universities due to the Bali bombing, so that meant we weren't able to go. But I also remember visits from people like Ken Allen and messages and visits from, for example, Margaret Bell, who was the founding director of Volunteering Australia and the world president of IAVE, and of Kylie Bates, who was a former deputy CEO of VA. She was the deputy president of IAVE and then world president from 2014 to 2020. So one thing you might not know is that the red V, which has become an international symbol for volunteering, was actually commissioned by Margaret Bell, that former president of Volunteering Australia, and given to Volunteering Australia and IAVE to be used universally as a symbol of volunteering. And it's a small piece of trivia, I know, but actually that red V has become to symbolise something really important. And now just a very short introduction to our guest, Wendy Osborne. Wendy is a former board member of IAVE. She was a board member from 2010 to 2016 and was senior advisor to IAVE's major global research project on national leadership structures for volunteering. And she's really recently been working on, as a senior consultant, one of the projects that she's been working on is what she's going to be talking about today, and I'm going to leave her to tell you about that. I'd also like to just add that her involvement was formally recognised back in 2001 when she was awarded an OBE for services to volunteering within the UK. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term OBE, it's an honour. It's an Officer of the Order of British Empire, and it's bestowed by the reigning monarch. At that time, that would have been the Queen. So I'd like to now say welcome, Wendy, and hand over to you. We have somebody driving your slides, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you about this project and particularly about the research focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for your introduction. And I'm delighted to be with you my morning, because it's 7 a.m. in the morning here in the north of Ireland. And so I'm speaking to you from, I'm still in darkness at the moment. And I'm delighted to be with you. And I was asked to talk to you about the call to action for the future of volunteering, particularly to look at the global insights. But I also want to talk a little bit about the journey to date, and then just very briefly at the end talk about next steps. So I'll get started. So could we go to the next slide, please? So my agenda really is to talk about the call to action and to say something about why now, and to talk about the journey to date, and particularly to focus on this aspect of collective action, which I think goes to the heart of this very important research process. And I'd be interested in your views on that as we get to the question and at the end. And key insights, of course, the global key insights, what needs to change. And then I want to talk something about the launch of the call to action, the International Volunteer Year 2026, and next steps. So the next slide. So call to action, why now? Well, on this slide, there are a number of issues that are pertinent at this moment. You know, we're living in a world that is constantly in a state of change. Global disruption and, unfortunately, deepening inequalities are part of what we see day and daily. And we know that within that, volunteers are the fundamental building block of community and civic life. 862 million people volunteer worldwide every month. United Nations volunteers used to say that was 1 billion, but a couple of years ago they changed that to 862 million. 862 million people every month is still a lot of people. And IAVE and other global organizations, and I'm sure organizations like you who represent them this morning, volunteering remains often unrecognized, often undervalued, and indeed poorly resourced. And that's what IAVE members across the globe are consistently telling us. And then 2 years ago, in December 2023, the United Nations General Assembly declared 2026 as the International Years of Volunteers for Sustainable Development. And it seemed to IAVE at that moment, 2 years ago, that 2026 would create a positive and pivotal moment to actually re-energize, recharge, and really refocus on volunteering and its global sustainability, its global impact. So that is what we did. So the call to action is focused on making change happen. And that is really important. Go to the next slide, please. So when we had this idea, I had the idea that we would use 2026 as a pivotal moment for volunteering. And remember, 2026 is 25 years on from 2001, which was the first International Year for Volunteering, for which I was involved with that as the CEO of a national leadership organization for volunteering in the UK. And I was actually at the IAVE conference, which opened the International Year in the Netherlands in 2001. So this collective action was really important to IAVE, for what we realized that we had to have facilitated leadership here. This wasn't about us as one organization. It wasn't about any one organization. It was about a whole cohort of a global community and a global movement for volunteering. But we needed to start somewhere. So we started with 5 global partners, and you see those on the banner that we've been using as part of the call to action initiative. They were, of course, IAVE, Forum, the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, UNICEF, particularly Generation Unlimited, and the Volunteer Groups Alliance. And those 5 global partners came together to increase what IAVE was doing in kinds of looking at creatively, looking at what we were trying to do, looking at collaboration, and them using their networks and their outreach to increase and enhance what we were trying to do. And then there had to be this global volunteering community collective engagement. And we had to look at how we were going to do that. And that's how you get this idea of our version of participatory research, put it like that. So what we decided to do was, first of all, we needed to look at what were the current trends. And IAVE has done this in the past. This is a process we've used previously, and it's been very useful to us. So we commissioned a challenge paper. And we commissioned Helene Parole and Jacob Matty from South Africa and Cliff Allam from the UK to do a challenge paper. And that challenge paper was looking at research over the last 4 to 5 years on volunteering and looking at what were the key trends, what were the key issues coming forward, and what were the challenges going forward for volunteering. And that challenge paper then gave us some more ideas of how we should take this forward. So a year ago, what we agreed to do was that what we would focus on was having a call to action for the future of volunteering. And that although we would use the International Year as a pivotal moment, we would see that it didn't end at the end of 2026. We saw this call to action as having a highlight for 2026, but moving beyond that and taking us really into the next decade. And how were we going to really make this globally relevant? And how were we going to give ownership outside of IAVE and outside of our global partners? So what we decided to do was to create a global survey and also to have dialogues, what we called global, regional and national dialogues. And that the challenge paper informed the questions for the global survey. And then the dialogues were all really around one simple question. What needs to change to help enable volunteering, to have more volunteers, to have volunteers with better impact, to have better recognition for volunteering? What needs to change? And we're very focused on asking people that in your particular situation, what needs to change in your country, in your organization, to be able to make things better for volunteering. So we were really pitching it at a globally relevant call to action, and that was really very important. It was very important to be relevant and impactful. It was important to reach out to diverse perspectives, and it was important to give ownership to this initiative. It was to have any impact at all, it needed to have global ownership. So next slide, please. So just to recap quickly on the journey to date. In February 2025, we had the challenge paper. April to July 2025, we had global, regional and national dialogues. March to July 2025, we ran a global survey. July to November, we created the call to action statement. The call to action statement is about to go live. I'm happy to say I can't share it. It's embargoed, but it is finalized. And also there is an insights paper. So the challenge paper and all the information from the dialogues and the global survey were brought into an insights paper, which will be launched this month as well. And it's that insights paper that has allowed us to create a call to action statement. Now, along the way, to go back to that idea of giving ownership, after we had the challenge paper, we asked a range of organizations, big, small, to help us to test the global survey questions. Then in terms of the dialogues, we went out with a state of notes, facilitator notes for all the dialogues. So they were all actually focused on the one question and that was really important to getting back, really good feedback. So there's quite a lot of information here, and this morning I'm really only touching the surface of that. So could we go to the next slide, please? So a global volunteering response. The global survey had 10,000 respondents from 163 countries, including both volunteers and organizations. Actually, 40% of the respondents to the global survey were from volunteers themselves, which I think is very, very important here. And, we were absolutely amazed by that. I mean, that we didn't expect that. So I think what that says is that, we did hit a moment in time. I think people really galvanized behind this, really felt that what we were asking, what we were saying, what we were focusing on was important. There were 126 dialogues involving nearly 4,000 participants. And that was 13 global, 13 regional, and there are 6 regional areas of IAVE. So that would be Asia Pacific, Africa, Europe, Latin America, the Arab region, and I might be missing one, and 100 country level dialogues across 74 countries. So there was a huge uptake and engagement here. And there still is that. I mean, I asked for organizations to provide media assets for us to help us to launch the call to action. And I think to date, we're sitting at 60 countries who've responded to that call. So there is real interest and engagement here. So as I said, responses came from a wide range of stakeholder groups, youth, government institutions, the private sector, philanthropic entities, volunteer involving organizations, and as I've said, volunteers. And that is really important because the findings clearly reflect a genuinely global diversity of perspectives. And that's what we wanted. And I'm glad we actually achieved that. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk about the global insights that we find. And you'll find all of these in the insights paper when it is published. Now, when we get to the call to action statement, it won't actually look like this because clearly it's shorter than the insights paper. And we're taking the insights paper and we are also refining it into what would be a call to action statement of commitments. So they're 2 different documents, but they are linked because the evidence from the global survey and the dialogues that went into the insights paper has completely informed the call to action statement. And that call to action statement has been about 25-30 organizations have reviewed it from all sizes and shapes of organizations to help us make sure that we are remaining globally relevant. And I also say that the things that I'm going to talk about now are not new. You will recognize them from your work in terms of volunteering. And, and I want to say that that is really important actually, because what it clearly identifies is that we do need change, that we are sitting with some issues that are turning out to be systemic, and we really need to get those moved into a better place. So we really do need change. So one of the key themes that's coming out is about the value of volunteering. People are saying quite strongly, volunteering is essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And actually the UN itself has said that the goals can't be delivered without volunteers, but we don't see that recognition and push and resources that help volunteers and volunteer involving organizations to drive that. That we need to recognize that volunteering benefits both communities and individual volunteers, and that volunteering is evolving. Big message here. And that organizations need to catch up. Whenever I used to talk, I used to say about going into one of your supermarkets, and in 20 or 30 years, everything on the shelves, some things stay the same, but everything changes. And you can get things now that you couldn't get 5 or 6 years ago. And volunteering is like that. It is a social dynamic. It changes. And we need to be aware of that all of the time. And there is a need to be able to evolve and to meet the expectations of new volunteers coming forward, and to meet the expectations of a very changing world, not least within the digital space. and that volunteering remains poorly recognised and celebrated, so that we do need to raise the profile of volunteering to find some way of actually showcasing the impact of volunteers and to give recognition to what they are achieving globally. Next slide, please. The second big theme was the enabling environment for volunteering. And when we talk about the enabling environment, we're talking about everything that allows volunteering to flourish. And of course, volunteering infrastructures are critical to this. So that could be policies and frameworks set out by governments. Many countries in the world, you can't volunteer unless there's a form of legislative framework that allows you to do that. So policies and legislative frameworks are very important. Also, volunteer involving organizations and, providing the right kind of support and acknowledging the importance of volunteering and, providing an enabling environment to help that to happen. And there's a feeling that although there are policy and legal frameworks in many countries in the world, you'd actually be amazed at the number of countries that have those. They need to be strengthened. Sometimes they're sitting on a shelf, never used, never referred to, and they need to be brought forward and they need to be strengthened. And that in many countries of the world, volunteering management remains underdeveloped. So while we might be talking about the United Kingdom and Australia having very clear volunteer management structures and professional standards, in many places it is underdeveloped, and that we need to share that and look at that. And that cross-sectoral alliances are vital but weak. Coming out of COVID, and there was some research that was done by IAVE and others, including the United Nations volunteers, clearly identified that collaboration was an important building block for successful volunteering. And we're still saying that those cross-sectoral alliances particularly can be weak, and we need to strengthen those to strengthen volunteering. And that inclusion and equity in volunteering requires work. So people were telling us that, there are still, people who are excluded from being able to volunteer for lots of reasons, because the enabling environment doesn't support it, because they aren't asked to volunteer, and they don't have the right kind of support in place to enable them to volunteer. So inclusion and equity remain quite large issues. Next slide, please. To carry on with this enabling environment, investment in volunteering. Volunteering is under-resourced. Now, we're talking about a global picture here, but I know that a number of organizations from Australia were involved in some of the dialogues that I was actually involved in. So I do know that, resources for volunteering across the world remain quite fluid and can be quite challenging. And that significant and sustained investment is required. It is really important to see that volunteering is something that is with us all of the time, and that to sustain it and grow it, we do need that significant and sustained investment. And I always think I'm talking to a group of researchers here. When a research person, our researcher was Dr. Chris Malora from Goldsmith University, originally from the Philippines, perhaps known to a number of you on this call. And, I never saw a research piece of paper that didn't call for more research, which is perfectly fine. But we do need to strengthen the evidence base. And this is about looking at this whole big issue of how do we measure the impact? How do we measure volunteering? And how do we measure particularly the impact? More than numbers. What is the impact of those 862 million who volunteer on a monthly basis? And we haven't just cracked that issue yet, and we need to do that. So we need to strengthen the evidence base. Protecting both volunteers and the civic and volunteering space was coming out as an issue as well. First of all, safeguarding and protecting volunteers in a very practical way. Volunteers are often first responders in terms of crisis. It could be a climate crisis, it could be a natural disaster, it could be a conflict situation. And volunteers are vulnerable in those situations, and there's evidence clearly to show that they are not protected as they should be. So there's definitely a call for better safeguarding and protection of volunteers in a practical sense. And then it's what I'm calling creating empowering environments. First of all, there was an issue about international sending organizations for volunteering and looking at decolonizing that space. But it goes wider than that. It's about empowering communities and individuals to be able to volunteer, and that when they're volunteer, they feel that they're empowered to have a say and to get involved, and that their voice actually matters. And in many places, and I suppose COVID identified this too, people are stepping outside their door and doing volunteering for their neighbours. In many countries, you don't get organisations. It's about mutual aid and self-help. It's the very fundamentals of what make voluntary action work, and that we need to protect the space that allows that to happen and to support that informal and formal volunteering going forward. So the next slide, please. So I'm running through this, I know, at a rate of knots. And coming from Ireland, I have a tendency to speak quite fast. So I do hope that you have been able to make out my accent and to understand the issues that I am raising today. The launch of the call to action statement happens on the 5th of December 2025. It happens at the United Nations headquarters in New York as part of the official launch of the International Volunteer Year 2026. So we have 10 minutes in that 2-hour agenda, but it allows us to really put the call to action on that stage. And we have always aligned the call to action with IAVE 2026. And indeed, our silent partner in all of this has been the United Nations Volunteers Programme, who've been with us for the last year, every step of the way, and giving support to the call to action statement. And we see that support in being able to launch it in the UN on the 5th of December. It does set out a series of commitments. It is about the future of volunteering, and we do want everyone to get involved. Just as this process to date has been about collective action, then we do want to keep that collective action going. And we do need people to, get engaged, to stay involved, to look at that commitments and to see what you can do, and to see how you can use it as an advocacy tool to encourage others in your networks, other key stakeholders, the corporate sector, governments, to also get involved in making that change happen. And we do need people to drive that. So once we launch the call to action, we will be sending out, and I'll send this to Sarah and Megan and they can distribute it to you, information about the statement. I'll also be sending the information and link to the Insights paper. And we'll be sending out, what you can do, how you can hashtag it and share it within your own social media channels, and really look at it and get engaged and keep it as a living document, which actually is being activated as we move through 2026 and into the next decade. And why we need everyone to get involved and why the call to action is important is because those 14,000 individuals who actually responded globally to this call to action really want change. And, IAVE as a global leadership organization started this because we felt that change was needed. And therefore, we're still really pushing that change agenda. And how we do that change, how we measure that change, how we deliver it, we're actively looking at that at the moment, so that we're looking to see how we can collect all the information that people are doing to do the commitments, and how we can then say something about the impact this call to action is making, because that is also very important to us. So the journey continues, even as I speak here today. So the next slide. So all I have to say is really thank you. Thank you for attending today. Thank you for listening to me. And I really do want to engage. I think it's really important. As I said, this is about collective action. It's about collective engagement. It is a dynamic that we want people to engage in. So I'm delighted now that we have plenty of time to do that and to take some questions. And I'm happy to open the discussion and to engage with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. What my hope is that somebody would like to raise their hand and ask a question. We've got some clapping hands that I can see at the moment, so that's really good. We don't necessarily have anybody raising their hand at the moment. So I have a question for you, which you can decline to answer. I'm aware very much that you're trying to save some of the important things for the launch and so on. But in terms of the call to action, how much of the work that's been done has also drawn on, for example, the National Strategy for Volunteering in Australia and similar types of things from around the world? Because there's work being done in all sorts of places, and you would be familiar what's been happening in your part of the world. Has that gone into the mix as well, or has it more relied on the people who have contributed in the specific survey and online workshops and so on?
Well, the first thing is that the challenge paper that we started with was asked to look at all of those things and to draw information from what was happening across the world. So that started us off. But the call to action has really very much relied on that evidence which has come from the global survey and indeed the dialogues. And indeed, you know, Volunteering Australia ran a dialogue and all that information has fed in. So, and our hope, as I said, is that people will see this as globally relevant. It's actually one of the most difficult things to do because although volunteering is a global dynamic, it, of course, it's culturally, you know, it's created by its culture and the shape of it. So, you know, if you look at volunteering in Latin America and you look at volunteering in Asia Pacific and you look at volunteering in Asia Pacific between Australia, New Zealand, and, you know, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, and, you know, Mongolia, it is actually, you know, there are nuances here. And so we were desperately trying to make sure that we actually did hit on some of those nuances so that we created something that people, wherever they were, could identify with. And I hope we've done that, but it has been a challenge. Well, I do know, Larry, thank you for your question. I do know that a member of the Australian government, one of the agencies, was involved in one of the dialogues that I attended. And I mean, I think if I remember correctly, I can't remember the person's name, I apologize for that, but I remember one of the issues that was raised. And one of the issues that was raised was that, you know, government was not recognizing, you know, volunteering and the importance of the infrastructure to support volunteering. And, you know, so that if funding was being directed away from volunteering to, when funding is tight, it was volunteering that often was suffering and not getting the resources it required because there was that you know, lack of recognition for the impact of volunteers. And actually that resonates across the globe.
Thanks, Wendy. It might be better not to identify who participated anyway, just for all sorts of reasons. We now have a couple more questions. So Kirsten has asked, is there a plan or the potential to develop a plan for a global volunteering research agenda? The lead organisations in the project are all practitioner policy driven. Will the volunteering research organisations and, for example, International Society for Third Sector Research, etc., be engaged on the research component?
I'm not quite sure because our research is now finished, so this would be the research component going forward. Well, what I would say is that I suppose the insights paper identifies that, you know, more research would be helpful to showcase the impact of volunteering, and I think we would be asking a call out to researchers in the field and across the globe, you know, keep telling us what you're doing. I'll do a little plug here, if I may, Megan, for the World Volunteer Conference, which actually is happening. The IAVE World Volunteer Conference is happening in November 2026. And we will be, I believe, with our hosts in Saudi Arabia, putting out a call for presenters. And at that point, what we are hoping to do is to look at the call to action statement. And when we're looking for presenters, particularly from the research world, to ask them to showcase what research they're doing that might fit or align with the call to action. So we will be doing that, and I think we will go back to looking again at that, certainly as over the next couple of years, to try to identify and to share what people are doing, because you know, we live in a world where communication is fantastic, but I find that people, you know, are not aware of what's happening in other places. So you will find that what's happening with the national strategy on the stage in Australia is not on that world stage. And what we really want to do is to share those things that are happening. So for instance, I've already asked, or I've already suggested to our hosts in the World Volunteer Conference, that we look as part of the World Volunteer Conference where governments are doing national strategies across the world, and how can we learn from that. And Volunteering Australia and indeed Scotland are two that I know quite well. So, you know, that showcases that those are happening, and they do provide an exemplar for other regions and other countries.
Yes, I think perhaps, Kirsten, that puts for us as researchers the responsibility to take these things to those research organisations as well. We have a question now from Sam. Sam says, thanks for the presentation. I'm interested in where Forum's latest volunteering standards sit with IAVE's call to action, so how the things fit together. Okay,
it's a good question. And we identify as part of the call to action because it has been raised about this importance of good practice standards. Now, the international standards that are supported by Forum, we don't name those because many countries have their own standards that may be aligned to the international, but aren't, you know, are called something different. So we don't actually name one that you have to use, but what we are saying is that standards are really important. And of course, you know, that does highlight Forum standards for organizations that don't have anything, or countries that don't have anything of their own at the moment.
Yes, I guess it makes sense if you're trying to thread together things from everywhere that you have to be a bit careful about that. We have a question now from David saying, hi, Wendy, thanks for an interesting presentation. I was wondering how you see corporate volunteering playing a part in the call to action. My research is looking at corporate volunteering and how it can be defined and conceptualised. There are interesting angles about CSR strategies and motivations that I'm working on now. How important do you see this type of volunteering will be, and did any insights come out in the survey?
Well, IAVE has a Global Corporate Volunteer Council, and a number of those corporate organisations actually were engaged with the call to action, not only in responding to the survey and in doing dialogues, but actually in reviewing the call to action statement. So the corporate sector is really important. It's important for a number of reasons. It's important for the corporate volunteering that they do, which is often aligned to their CSR agenda. But it's also important because they're working alongside often volunteer involving organizations. And we're asking them to actually do more to support those volunteer involving organizations in a partnership approach to, say, for instance, develop their practice or develop some of the other volunteering that they're doing, and also to collaborate with other stakeholders. There's a big push to see the corporate sector come forward and, you know, work more with the other volunteering infrastructure stakeholders. And I think that's one of the commitments that we would like to see taken up. That's really important. But we do have a tendency to see these things in silos, and you know, and that is and that, and I think as we go forward, it's really important that we align those silos and we say where we can add value across all of those stakeholders that are involved in volunteering.
Yes, it's interesting how we can end up seeing things separately when in fact they'll work better together. We have a question from Larry, which I'm not sure that you'll be able to answer. It would be more likely to be something that we would need to take back to VA, and that is, will VA have an engagement strategy for 2026? But perhaps I can flip that round to the other way and say, what are you doing in terms of encouraging all the peaks that you have been working with and have relationships with to go into that next level for 2026? Is there anything specific that would be helpful for us to flag with VA, or is VA already in conversation with you, and so on?
Well, VA has already been engaged with a call to action, and indeed they are one of the organizations who have sent their media assets to it. And I've seen a lovely photograph of them holding up, saying quite loudly in a video, we support the call to action. So I think they will continue to be engaged as we move through IAVE. And what we want people to do, the most important thing here is for people to see that the call to action aligns with what they're doing. So there isn't any point in us saying this is something new and you have to drop everything you're doing. It must align and people must see the value of it from where they are. So I'm hoping that whenever they talk, VA talks about their national strategy, talks about volunteering in Australia, that they also weave into that the call to action. And so that the work that they're doing actually enhances the call to action, also meeting their own agenda.
Yes, I guess that makes sense. It's meant to build on, not cast aside. So at the moment, that's all I've got in the questions that are here. But I'm sure there is people out there who are just hesitating to put a question into the chat. I think one of the things that occurs to me is that at times that we can have a little bit of trouble keeping up with all the things that are happening around the place. And so there's probably a site or a place where we can keep track that's specifically about the call to action, and we should bookmark that perhaps. We have another question. See, I managed to extend out a little bit, so we've got a question this time from, I think it would be Kieran, but I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce the name. It says, and this person has identified themselves as a volley. Thanks for your presentation, Wendy. Could you please talk a bit more to the collection of data and understanding the impact that volunteers are having beyond the dollars or hours or similar metrics? We have groups of people that do great work and their skills have more impact than a simple dollar value. How do we collect this data in a standardised manner internationally so that there are useful metrics as a benchmark to say that the call to action was effective?
That's a very good question, Kieran. And, you know, I live in a world where often when you talk to organizations and individuals about impact measurement, they have a tendency to put their head in their hands because it has been one of those challenges that we have, you know, had difficulty cracking. A number of organizations have done it very successfully for themselves, but trying to get something that as one size fits all has been really difficult. But I have lived a lifetime believing that the dollar or the pound sign or the numbers game is not the value of volunteering, that the value of volunteering is the change that people make, often in their own lives as much as in their communities, and that is so important. And often it's done through storytelling, and often it's done through organizations, you know, being able to say, well, you know, and I think it's what's not there. So one example I would use is if an organization has a befriending project and they can actually say, show clearly the change in people's lives, the people they're befriending, the change in their lives that the volunteer has actually made. So it's trying to get that all of the time. Now, interestingly enough, the United Nations volunteers State of the World's Volunteering, they do that, I think they do that report every 2 years. The report that will come out in December, also being launched on the 5th of December in New York, is focused entirely on impact measurement. And they have engaged researchers from one of the universities in the UK to actually look at that whole issue. And I don't know exactly what's in it, but I think that that is something that may hopefully provide a global focus or some kind of, you know, guidance or like a, you know, a sort of a roadmap to say this is what we might be able to do together. But one of the things I think that we don't do that we could do better at is sharing where impact measurement in organizations has really worked, has been successful, and how can we share the methodologies that they use to others in similar organizations or measuring similar types of volunteering. But it has been a hard nut to crack, and I think it remains a challenge. But I think what we're clearly saying in the call to action is that we need to actually, you know, really make sure that we are making a change there, and we are doing something to help people measure the impact. Lots of people ask me all the time, can you just send me a template? I wish I could, but it's just not as simple as that, unfortunately.
I think actually that storytelling is the best way to pass on the message about impact. Fits with that notion that, in fact, one of the best ways to recruit volunteers is through word of mouth, because the storytelling moves forward. Kieran has just said, thanks for the transparent answer. So that's a nod to you, Wendy, in relation to that. We now...
Thanks very much, Megan, and apologies for being late. I was stuck on a train somewhere in outer suburban Melbourne for quite some time, but thank you, Wendy, for that really insightful and in-depth look at what's come out of the research, and I think a lot of food for thought for all of us here, and inspiration for what we could be doing and working on and progressing both within our research and within volunteer involving organisations. So thank you very much for dedicating the time to talk to us today. I know it's probably an unreasonable hour for you in Ireland at the moment. Before we wind up for today, I just wanted to give a quick promotional plug to the National Volunteering Research Network, who have auspiced today's presentation from Wendy. And for those of you that aren't members and aren't aware, Volunteering Australia has a National Volunteering Research Network, which was founded in 2021, I think. And essentially we're a group of research interested people, so academics, practitioners, policymakers, that get together a couple of times a year to share information and knowledge about anything related to research and volunteering. So the aim is to really find out what everyone's doing so that we can collaborate and work together to enhance policy engagement and to improve the world of volunteering. So as Megan's probably mentioned, she and I are the current co-chairs of the network, and if you are interested in joining us, I think Sarah is going to put the email address you can contact in the chat. So please get in touch if you're interested in joining our group, and we'll add you to the list, and you'll get a couple of invitations to online webinars, things that we run during the year. So nothing too onerous, but we'd love to have more of you involved. So please get in touch if you're interested in being involved. But apart from that, I think I'm formally tasked with the responsibility of concluding this wonderful webinar. So again, sincere thanks to you, Wendy, and to all of you for attending, particularly to our East Coast participants, as I know it's outside work hours, but we were very lucky to have Wendy volunteer to talk to us today, and it's been a great opportunity. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day or your evening.